tomorrow, January 17th. Perhaps it was written in the stars, or maybe painted on a canvas. If you're into Grail lore, Mary Magdalene, bloodline of Christ and Mary, you might be familiar with this painting. Christopher Morford mentions how perhaps these are planets, right? I've been looking at this for years on and off, trying to extrapolate something out of it. So I said, hey, okay, I'll give it a go. Planets, right? First thing I noticed is he doesn't have sandals on. And it's cut off, unfortunately, but in the full painting, they all have sandals on. He doesn't. So through a planetary lens, that might mean he's stationary. See the sun, right? If you believe in the solar system model, the sun being stationary, at least relative to the other planets orbiting. Everything's moving out there, but maybe he's stationary. Maybe he's the sun. He's not traveling, so he doesn't have sandals. I measured the angle at which his staff is leaned, and it's about 15 degrees. 15 degrees in solar travel is an hour, right? So an hour is a solar measurement. So he has an hour marked, right? And the word hour is an anagram for the name Horus, the Egyptian sun god. So what if he's the sun? He says, Christopher says she could be Venus. Now what about this guy? The other inconsistency I noticed was that these two have laurels. They have crowns or wreaths, right, around their head. He doesn't and she doesn't. So the laurel or the crown or the wreath has often been a symbol of many things, but mainly being the sun, the solar, right, sunlight. So he's a sun, but he has one too. And there are multiple suns out there. Some say Sirius is a sun. Some say, Alcyone is our central sun of the galaxy in the Pleiades, which appears in the Pleiades. The Nibiru, some consider that the second sun. But what about the dark sun? What about Saturn, right? Well, Christopher mentions this shadow, and he says that's a terribly painted shadow for such a high-class painter such as Poussin. And he says it looks like a scythe or a sickle. Now, when I saw that and I looked at this, I immediately thought, if we're looking at stars or planets, and this is a sickle, then you think Saturn, because Cronus in Greek mythology is Saturn, and he carries the scythe or the sickle. He's Father Time or the Grim Reaper. So though it's not his shadow, he's next to the shadow. So what if that's Saturn? What if that's Venus? They're looking at each other and she's making contact with them. So what if that's a conjunction between Saturn and Venus? I'll get back to that in a sec. First, I want to say this is cut off, like I said. The tomb goes down a little further in the painting. The measurement of the bottom of the tomb, I measured it on my geometry program. From the bottom of the tomb to his finger, compared to the bottom of the tomb to the top, is the golden ratio. Very close. Might be exact, might be a little off. Golden ratio, though. And the golden ratio is found in the 5-pointed star. Now, the orbit between Venus and Earth around the sun creates a 5-pointed star, a pentagram, every 8 years. So what if he's looking at her like, hey, do I have your ratio right? Everything in these paintings meant something, So nothing is too far-fetched to kind of extrapolate, especially with this where there's not too much to the painting. Then it's like, what are the variables, angles, who's wearing what, So back to this perhaps conjunction. I looked into when the next time this conjunction is going to happen. And this, I had this epiphany stream on this last week, just less than a week ago, maybe. And I found out that The next conjunction is on January 17th, the day of the blue apples in Rennes-le-Château. Once again, the blue apples was what the cipher that mentioned this very painting was alluding to. So January 17th, and that's tomorrow. Perhaps this alignment means something. That I mean, Venus and Saturn aligning isn't insanely rare, but the last time it happened, like this was in 1993, according to the internet. So that's 30 plus years ago. Good enough time. But with the concoction of everything else that's happening, you know, all the stuff in the sky, the climax of world politics, the pyramids are said, according to Drew Melchizedek, pyramids are most active in January. It's a potent time, and maybe you feel it. What's happening behind closed doors right now, and all of this, you know, this lore, this Grail line, all this stuff. So I'll shift you over to this, because after I figured this out that night, or theorized on it, I was laying in bed, and up on the ceiling, this is the loft, and I've never seen this before. This is my partner's room. And for whatever reason, she never does this. She turned on a blue light. And I lay down in bed, and I look up, and I see these blue orbs and these like blue apples. They look just like the blue apples in the cathedral that they're mentioning. So that's a synchronicity right there. On top of the fact that when I was plucking away at this, my mom accidentally called me. And the time she called me at was 1:17, which is in number January 17th, the day of the blue apples. The day these two, if these are the planets, go conjunct.